The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in my apartment as I sat frozen, staring at the email that had just landed in my inbox. Save the date. Annual Sinclair family reunion at Willow Lake Lodge. My name wasn't mentioned once. Not in the cheerful subject line, not in the list of confirmed attendees, not even as an afterthought tucked in the body of the message. Just Jason, Megan, their spouses, their kids, a new generation of Sinclair pride paraded out like trophies while I remained invisible, exactly as I had been for the past 10 years. A sharp gust rattled the windows behind me, carrying the chill of the autumn evening into the room. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the cold, but from the hollow ache settling deep inside my chest. I knew better than to expect anything different. I told myself I was prepared this time, and yet here I was sitting alone in my penthouse apartment, feeling like a 12-year-old girl left behind at the dinner table once again. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. Without even looking, I knew it would be her. Mom, Eleanor Sinclair, right on cue. I hesitated only for a second before answering. Hi, Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady. Harper, sweetheart, she cooed, and the falseness in her tone made my stomach churn. About the reunion, you know how it is, dear. Jason's boys are growing so fast, and Megan's bringing her new fiancé. We're a little tight on space this year. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me like so much background noise. I'd heard it all before. Of course, I said lightly. Wouldn't want to overcrowd things. There was a beat of silence, and I almost thought she might say something different this time, but she didn't. We'll miss you, she added finally, in a voice that made it clear she wouldn't. I hung up without another word. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the silence of my apartment. No angry shouting, no crying, no pleading for inclusion. Just silence, cold, final, and oddly liberating. I pushed back from the table and stood, my reflection caught faintly in the window. A successful woman in a sharp navy suit, standing alone against the glittering skyline of the city. A woman who had clawed her way to the top, despite every whispered slight, every pointed exclusion, every invisible scar. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Piper. Let me guess, it read, the annual you're not invited call? I smiled grimly and texted back, right on schedule. You know what this means, Piper replied instantly. Time to stop letting them rent space in your head for free. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. She was right. This wasn't just another year of being forgotten. This was a turning point, a moment to decide if I would continue being the outcast they tolerated, or if I would finally reclaim the parts of myself they had stolen piece by piece over the years. I sat back down, fingers hovering over the keyboard, not to respond to their email, but to open the real estate website I'd bookmarked months ago. Willow Lake Lodge, the place that held every childhood memory, both sweet and bitter, was on the market, and it was vulnerable, just like they'd always assumed I would be. Not anymore. My heartbeat roared in my ears as I clicked the listing, staring at the photos of peeling paint, sagging porches, and cracked windows. To them, it was still a shrine to family legacy. To me, it was something different now. It was an opportunity. The cursor hovered over the contact agent button. I didn't flinch. I didn't second guess. I clicked, and somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't the forgotten Sinclair daughter anymore. I was the one setting the terms now. The next morning, the city woke up in a blur of honking horns and rushing footsteps. But I sat at my kitchen counter, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between my hands. I stared at the real estate agent's reply blinking on my phone screen. Available for immediate private viewing. Sellers motivated. Cash offers prioritized. Cash wasn't a problem, not anymore. The memory of Mom's voice from last night echoed in my mind, sweetly shutting the door on me once again. My fingers clenched around the mug. They had always expected me to fade away quietly, to accept being the forgotten daughter, the necessary inconvenience they never quite knew what to do with. Not this time. Morning, warrior, Piper chirped from my phone as her face filled the screen in a video call. I smiled faintly. Morning. You were right. I usually am, she winked. So, what's the plan, Miss Sinclair? I hesitated for a moment before answering. I'm buying the lodge. Piper's mouth dropped open. You're serious? Dead serious, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Not to throw it in their faces. Not exactly. I paused, searching for the right words. I need to take back something they stole from me. Piper's eyes softened. Your childhood. I nodded slowly. Harper, she said gently, this is going to change everything. I know, I whispered, and for once, the thought didn't terrify me, it thrilled me. Later that day, after signing a confidentiality agreement with a realtor, I toured Willow Lake Lodge under the cover of anonymity. The place was worse than I remembered. The front porch sagged dangerously under my weight, the paint peeled like shedding skin, and the familiar scent of lake water and old would hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood alone in the grand, crumbling dining room where family dinners once buzzed with laughter. Laughter I was rarely part of. I traced my fingers across the battered oak table, seeing shadows of a girl who had learned too early that silence was safer than disappointment. No more. This place has good bones. The realtor chirped nervously, mistaking my silence for hesitation. With a little love, it could be a gem again. I smiled thinly. It's not the house that needs fixing, I murmured. We finalized the paperwork in record time. Cash. No contingencies. No haggling. Just like that, the lodge, and every memory it held, belonged to me. Driving back into the city, as twilight bled across the sky, I called Andrew Monroe. My mentor. My anchor. Good news, I said as he picked up. Let me guess, he chuckled. You finally decided to take the promotion? Not yet, I teased. But I did make a rather interesting purchase. As I explained, he laughed. A deep, proud sound that warmed me more than any hollow words from my family ever had. You know, he said thoughtfully, there's an old saying, success isn't revenge. It's proof you were never the problem. I smiled, watching the city lights flicker on one by one below me. And Harper, he added, his tone serious now, whatever happens next, make sure you're doing it for you. Not them. I am, I said softly, and for the first time I meant it. That night, long after the city fell asleep, I sat at my desk drafting plans, renovation budgets, event schedules, staffing contracts. The lodge wouldn't just be a family relic anymore. It would be a thriving lakeside retreat, a symbol of everything they had failed to recognize in me. By the time the first rays of dawn pierced the skyline, my plan was no longer just an idea. It was a blueprint for something bigger, stronger, and completely mine. They had written me off a long time ago. They thought they had closed the chapter on me forever. But some stories don't end just because someone else puts down the pen. Sometimes the girl they left behind grows up and writes a new ending. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless rhythm of meetings, phone calls, and blueprints. By day, I sat in high-rise boardrooms, commanding respect from men twice my age as we negotiated the Richardson merger, the biggest deal our firm had ever touched. By night, I pored over renovation plans for the lodge, working with architects and contractors to transform the crumbling old house into something vibrant, something alive. Success, I realized, wasn't loud. It was quiet, relentless, inevitable. Andrew pushed me harder than ever, preparing me for the transition to London. This is it, Harper, he said during one late-night strategy session. You're about to step onto the international stage. Are you ready? I looked him squarely in the eyes. I was born ready, they just never bothered to look. He grinned, pride flickering across his usually stern features. Let them keep looking past you, while you build an empire. And that's exactly what I did. By mid-October, the lodge was almost unrecognizable. The peeling paint was replaced with sleek cedar shingles, the warped porch was rebuilt wider and stronger, and the dusty old dining room, once a battleground of whispered insults and exclusion, was now an elegant event hall with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Sometimes I stood there late at night, barefoot on the polished wood floors, listening to the soft lapping of the water against the shore, remembering the girl who had once sat alone on these steps, invisible and unwanted, and the woman who now owned every stone, every beam, every memory. The final nail came on a Monday morning. I was presenting the final pitch for the Richardson deal to a room full of CEOs, CFOs, and skeptical board members. The air was thick with tension, the kind that could snap a lesser person in half. But not me. Not anymore. I laid out my strategy, my projections, my vision, clear, sharp, undeniable. I answered every challenge without blinking, dismantled every doubt with calm precision. When the chairman finally stood, extending his hand across the table, I knew it was done. The deal was ours. The room erupted in polite applause, but all I heard was the roaring in my ears. A decade of being overlooked, dismissed, minimized, ending here. Andrew clapped me on the shoulder as the executives filed out. You realize, he said, this cements it. London is yours if you want it. I nodded, barely able to contain the storm inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but a fierce, blazing certainty. I didn't just deserve a seat at the table. I had built the damn table. That evening, Piper dragged me to a small wine bar downtown to celebrate. You, she announced dramatically as we clinked glasses, are officially unstoppable. I laughed, genuinely for the first time in weeks. Feels strange. Strange good or strange terrifying. I thought about it. About the lodge, gleaming under the autumn stars. About the title deed tucked safely in my desk drawer. About the upcoming move to London. The blank canvas stretching out before me. Both, I admitted. Piper leaned in, her expression suddenly serious. Just promise me one thing, Harper. Anything. Whatever happens when they find out, don't let them drag you back into their shadows. I smiled sadly, understanding all too well what she meant. They won't, I promised. They already lost me a long time ago. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, for the first time in forever, I felt weightless. I was no longer the forgotten daughter waiting for a seat at the table. I was the storm they never saw coming. And my time was just beginning. The gravel driveway crunched under the weight of unfamiliar tires as I stood at the front window of Willow Lake Lodge, a mug of coffee warming my hands. I wasn't expecting them until tomorrow, but there they were, Jason's black SUV, Megan's minivan, and a cloud of dust announcing their chaotic arrival like a bad omen. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply watched as they piled out, laughing, shouting over one another, unloading bags and coolers like they still owned the place. Like nothing had changed. Jason popped the trunk and pulled out a set of golf clubs, Dad's old clubs, and slung them over his shoulder without a second thought. Megan corralled her twins, barking orders while balancing a tray of store-bought cookies. None of them looked at the house. None of them noticed the restored porch, the gleaming new windows, the discreet but expensive landscaping. They didn't see the sweat, the nights, the choices that had gone into rebuilding it. Why would they? They had never seen me either. I placed my mug down carefully, smoothed my blazer, and walked to the door. Opening it slowly, I leaned casually against the frame. You're early, I said, voice calm, almost amused. Jason squinted up at me, confusion flickering across his face. Harper? Megan's jaw dropped. What are you doing here? I tilted my head. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Mom appeared from behind the van, dragging a battered suitcase. She froze when she saw me. For one exquisite moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Jason laughed awkwardly. We're here for the reunion. Trinity said she sent the invite weeks ago. I know, I said simply. I saw it. And Megan demanded, her voice sharper now. Are you visiting? I smiled thinly. No. I live here. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Charged. Jason blinked. You live here? I stepped aside, gesturing them in. Come on in. Mi casa es su casa, literally. They shuffled past me like dazed tourists, craning their necks, taking in the gleaming floors, the renovated kitchen, the updated decor. Mom's fingers brushed the new banister, reverent, confused. This isn't how we left it. No, I agreed. It's better. Megan dropped her bags with a thud. But how? When? I closed the door with a soft click behind them. A few months ago. Bought it privately. Renovated it. Own outright. Jason set down the golf clubs a little too hard. You bought the lodge? I raised an eyebrow. Someone had to save it. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Harper, dear, why didn't you tell us? I sipped my coffee slowly. Would you have cared? Her face flushed crimson. The kids ran through the hallways, their laughter bouncing off the walls, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Megan glared at me, folding her arms. You didn't have to sneak around like this. We're family. I let out a soft laugh. Family, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. Funny, that word means so many different things to different people. Jason stepped forward, attempting a smile. Well, it's still the reunion weekend, right? We're all here. We can make it work. I set my coffee down deliberately on the entryway table. Oh, we'll have a reunion, I said, voice silk, wrapped around steel. But this year, it's going to look a little different. Mom's eyes narrowed. Different how? I smiled, slow and sharp. New house. New rules. They stared at me, uncertain, uneasy, realizing, too late, that the Harper they thought they knew no longer existed. The Harper who once begged for a seat at the table was gone. The Harper standing before them now owned the table, and the house around it. The dining room at Willow Lake Lodge looked almost ceremonial now, flooded with the golden glow of sunset pouring through the tall windows. The same dining room where I'd once sat invisible while laughter and conversation passed right over my head. Today, I sat at the head of the table. Jason, Megan, and Mom took their usual places like muscle memory, shuffling awkwardly, casting furtive glances at one another but saying nothing. The unspoken truth filled the air, thick and bitter. This was no longer their house. I cleared my throat, gently breaking the silence. So, about the reunion. Jason brightened, eager to smooth things over. Yeah, about that. We can still host it here, right? I mean, it's tradition. I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers together thoughtfully. Traditions are funny things, I mused aloud. They only matter when they serve the people clinging to them, not necessarily everyone involved. Megan stiffened. Harper, don't make this ugly. I smiled, slow and measured. I'm not making anything ugly, Megan. I'm just stating facts. Mom picked up her wine glass with trembling fingers. We all have history here, Harper. Memories. I set my gaze on her, unblinking. Do you remember my 12th birthday party? Mom blinked. Of course. We had cake by the lake. You had cake by the lake, I corrected softly. I spent the afternoon washing dishes because Jason broke a fishing rod and blamed it on me. Silence. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was a long time ago. Was it? I asked, voice almost gentle, because funny enough, the pattern never changed. I rose from my seat, slowly, pacing the perimeter of the table. The polished floorboards clicked beneath my heels, punctuating every word. The college letters you never opened because you assumed I wouldn't get in. The scholarship offers you said weren't practical. The internships you dismissed as silly little jobs while Jason and Megan were praised for showing up to part-time retail work. Mom's face paled visibly. I stopped behind her chair, resting a hand lightly on the high back. You didn't forget me, Mom. You ignored me. There's a difference. Megan stood up suddenly, shoving her chair back. Fine. You want a medal for being successful now. Is that it? I tilted my head. No, I don't want your praise. I want you to recognize that I succeeded not because of you, but in spite of you. Jason opened his mouth, but Piper's timing was impeccable. She chose that moment to walk in carrying a small stack of glossy brochures. Sorry, she said with a faux cheerfulness, so biting it was practically a weapon. Just dropping off the event menus for the family reunion. She set the brochures on the table with a firm thud, scattering them like a deck of cards. Mom picked one up and gasped. The Four Seasons? Harper, this must have cost. Less than what I made last quarter, I interrupted calmly. Jason's eyes widened as he scanned the luxury details. Private ballroom. String quartet, custom menu. Why would you spend this much? Because, I said, walking slowly back to the head of the table this year, I wanted to make sure you remembered. Megan tossed the brochure down with a sneer. Remember what? Me, I said simply. The word hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. My phone buzzed softly on the table. A news alert. Without even picking it up, I knew what it was. The promotion had leaked early. The headlines would be everywhere by morning. Mom must have gotten the same alert because she fumbled for her phone, eyes wide as she read. Vice President of International Operations. She whispered, almost reverently. London headquarters. Overseeing mergers across 3 continents. Jason stared at me like I had grown a second head. You're moving? I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, next month. Megan sank heavily into her chair, deflated. Why didn't you tell us? I shrugged lightly. When exactly would you have listened? No one spoke. No one dared. For the first time in my life, their silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like victory. Not the flashy kind. Not the movie-ending kind with applause and hugs. No, this was quieter, colder, infinitely sharper. They hadn't lost me because I got rich. They lost me because they never thought I was worth keeping in the first place. And now they finally realized it. The evening stretched thin like a frayed thread as we all sat in that too bright, too quiet dining room. Outside, the last streaks of sunset bled into a bruised purple sky, but inside time felt frozen, heavy with everything left unsaid. Mom set her phone down, her hands trembling slightly. Harper, we made mistakes, she said, voice wobbling between guilt and self-preservation. But you can't punish us forever. I tilted my head slightly. Punish you? I repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just living my life. Jason leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. We get it now, okay? You're successful. You've proved your point. I studied him, wondering if he even realized how small his words made my journey sound. As if this was ever about proving a point to people who had decided long ago I wasn't worth noticing. No, I said quietly. You don't get it. You never did. Megan clutched her wine glass, so tightly I thought it might shatter. This isn't you, Harper. You're being vindictive. I smiled faintly, no humor in it. No, Megan. Vindictive would have been throwing you out the moment you pulled into the driveway. She flushed crimson but said nothing. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Please, we can fix this. We can be a family again. The word family scraped against my skin, like sandpaper. Tell me something, I said, voice low. Would you be saying this if I was still living paycheck to paycheck in some studio apartment? If I wasn't worth a headline? No one answered. They didn't have to. The silence screamed louder than any apology could. I pushed back my chair and stood, the legs scraping sharply against the hardwood. This house, I said, sweeping my gaze around the room, used to be the center of my universe. I would have done anything, to feel like I belonged here. I paused, letting the weight of it settle, but you made sure I knew I didn't. Jason opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but I shook my head. It's too late, not because of the money. Not because of the title, but because you never wanted me. Only what I could do for you. The hurt flickered across their faces, raw and undeniable. Mom rose slowly, crossing the room to me. She reached out, her hand trembling as it touched my sleeve. Please, she whispered, don't leave angry. I looked down at her hand, small and desperate against the fabric of my blazer, and for a heartbeat I almost gave in. I almost pretended this moment could erase years of being invisible, but I didn't. I stepped back, gently but firmly breaking her grip. "I'm not angry," I said, surprising myself with the truth. "I'm just done." The finality of it cracked through the room like a thunderclap. I turned, walking to the door without looking back. Piper was already there, leaning casually against the frame, car keys dangling from her fingers. "You ready?" she asked softly. I nodded once. Behind me, Mom's voice broke. "When will we see you again?" I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. The temptation to offer hope, to leave a crack in the door, tugged at me, but I knew better now. "You won't," I said simply. And then I stepped into the cool night air, breathing in freedom so sharp it almost hurt. The lodge stood behind me, proud and glowing under the stars, but it wasn't my anchor anymore. It was just a house, a beautiful, bittersweet reminder that some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. Piper opened the passenger door for me with a wink. "Where to, boss?" I slid into the seat without hesitation. "Anywhere but here." As we pulled away, I watched the lights of Willow Lake Lodge disappear in the rearview mirror, smaller and smaller, until they were nothing but a distant memory. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from them. I was running toward myself. The flight to London wasn't for another week, but my life in Vermont already felt like it belonged to someone else, someone younger, more desperate for a place to belong. I spent my last days at the lodge not packing, but sorting. Old photographs, dusty trophies, forgotten birthday cards, all the relics of a childhood spent on the margins. Some I kept, most I left behind. On my final night, Piper sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, flipping through an old scrapbook. "You were always smiling in these," she said, frowning. Even when they weren't looking." I shrugged. I learned early that smiles were easier than explanations. She reached over, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to explain anything anymore." I smiled faintly, but inside a hollow ache throbbed. Letting go of a place was easy. Letting go of the girl who once clung to it with bleeding hands, that was harder. A knock interrupted the quiet. Standing in the doorway was Mom. No suitcases this time. No grand gestures. Just her, small and tired, clutching something wrapped in faded linen. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded, too tired to fight the inevitable. She crossed the room slowly, setting the bundle on the bed between us. When I unwrapped it, my breath caught. It was the music box Dad had given me when I was 7, the one everyone else had forgotten I even owned. "I thought you might want it," Mom said, not meeting my eyes. I ran my fingers over the worn wood, the chipped paint, the tiny ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. So fragile, so breakable, so easily overlooked. "Thank you," I said quietly, setting it aside. Mom sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed, twisting her hands. "I know we were hard on you," she began, voice cracking. We didn't know how to handle you. You were always different. Different. Not difficult. Not wrong. Just different. And they hadn't known what to do with different, so they had pushed it into a corner and left it there to gather dust." I met her gaze squarely for the first time in years. I know. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. Some gaps can't be bridged with apologies offered too late. She rose slowly, as if weighted down by the enormity of everything left unsaid. At the door, she hesitated. "Take care of yourself, Harper." I nodded once. "You too." And then she was gone. Piper exhaled sharply, wiping at her eyes. "You okay?" I closed the music box, gently, tucking it into my carry-on. "I will be." The morning I left, the sky was a pale wash of blue, the lake a mirror reflecting nothing but empty space. Jason, Megan, even Mom had texted, last-minute promises of keeping in touch, invitations to future holidays. I deleted them all without reading. Promises made too late are just different versions of the same old silence. At the airport, Piper hugged me fiercely before stepping back, her eyes shining. "You know where to find me," she said. I smiled. Always. When my boarding group was called, I walked toward the gate without looking back. Not once. Above me, the loudspeakers crackled, announcing destinations far from Vermont, far from broken promises and half-healed scars. I wasn't escaping anymore. I wasn't chasing anything either. I was simply moving forward. As the plane lifted into the sky, I watched the ground fall away, the lake, the forests, the broken past shrinking into nothingness. Maybe one day I'd find a place that felt like home. Maybe not. Either way, I was done trying to earn it, because in the end, some battles aren't lost or won. Some battles just stop mattering, and that I realized was the real freedom.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
The July heat clung to me like a suffocating blanket as I sat on a cracked bench near the bus stop. The pavement shimmered in waves, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. 3 nights without a roof had left me hollow. My bag, the last remnant of my former life, sat at my feet, stuffed with a few clothes and the bare essentials. It was strange to think that just a year ago I was a nurse at a private clinic in New Haven, respected, with a small apartment of my own. Now I was simply Anna Whitaker, 30 years old, without a home, without a father, and without a future. I pulled a small mirror from my bag and studied the reflection that looked back. The same brown eyes, the same strong lines of my face, but dulled now by exhaustion and the bruising shadows under my eyes. I used to look confident in my nurse's uniform. I used to smile easily. Now, even my smile felt foreign, like it belonged to someone I no longer was. My thoughts dragged me backward to the day everything started unraveling. The clinic had blamed me for a patient's death, a mistake that wasn't mine. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. Court battles drained my savings. My reputation was destroyed. Then came the cruelest blow, my father falling ill. I sold our apartment to pay for his treatments, clinging to hope, but the treatments failed. Watching him waste away, watching the strength leave the man who had raised me alone, it broke something deep inside me. And when he finally passed, the silence left behind was unbearable. Yet he hadn't left me empty-handed. In his final days, he'd written a letter, not to me, but to someone I had only heard about in fragments of stories, his school friend, Richard Thompson. They had grown up together, but life had pulled them apart. My father was always too proud to ask for help, but as death closed in, he set that pride aside. He asked Richard to look after me, to not let me be lost in the world with nothing. The letter was folded carefully in my bag now, its paper softened by the countless times I'd held it, read it, and prayed it might change something. I glanced at my watch. 2 o'clock. The meeting was at 3. I still had an hour to gather myself, to pretend I was not broken, to appear as though I had something left to offer. I traced the address written on a scrap of paper. Greenwich, Connecticut, the heart of old wealth, a world I had only glimpsed in passing cars and glossy magazines. It felt impossible that someone like me would step into that world today. But what choice did I have? There was no going back to the clinic, no home to return to, no father waiting with a kind word and warm meal. Just this letter, this one fragile chance, this final tether to something beyond despair. I stood, adjusted the strap of my worn bag on my shoulder, and walked toward the bus that would carry me into the unknown. My father's last words echoed in my mind. Richard will remember me. He will understand. He will help you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. I felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile but alive. Today could be the beginning of something different, or the final proof that I truly had nowhere left to turn. The bus ride from the city to Greenwich took nearly 40 minutes, yet it felt like I had crossed into another world. The noise and grit of the streets where I had been surviving seemed to dissolve the farther we went, replaced by manicured hedges, wide lanes shaded by maples, and the kinds of houses I had only ever seen in glossy magazines. By the time I stepped off at the last stop, the afternoon sun was gilding rows of stone walls and wrought iron gates. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I followed the directions scrawled on that slip of paper, each step pulling me deeper into a neighborhood where wealth was woven into every brick and leaf. When I reached the gates of the Thompson estate, I had to pause. The mansion stood behind tall hedges, 3 stories of pale stone and glass, its sweeping lawn dotted with sculptures and rose beds that looked too perfect to be real. A man in a navy uniform stood at the gatehouse, and my throat tightened. I clutched the strap of my worn bag as I approached, my voice barely steady when I told him, "My name is Anna Whitaker. I have a 3 o'clock appointment with Mr. Richard Thompson." The guard checked his tablet, nodded, and pressed a button. The gates swung open soundlessly. "Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Please go ahead." The path was paved in pale stone, leading toward the front doors framed by columns. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the disparity between who I was and where I stood grew sharper. Just days ago, I had been sleeping on a wooden bench in a bus terminal. Now I was walking into the world of a man who could decide my future with a word. A man in a dark suit greeted me at the door, ushering me through a hall lined with oil paintings and marble statues. My breath caught at the sheer expanse of it, the vaulted ceilings, the chandeliers, the polished parquet, floor gleaming under my worn shoes. "Mr. Thompson is waiting in his study," the man said, his tone courteous but distant. I was shown into a room paneled with dark wood, where shelves of leather-bound books rose toward the ceiling. Behind a massive desk stood Richard Thompson himself. He was taller than I expected, his hair touched with gray, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Miss Whitaker," he said, stepping forward to shake my hand. "I'm glad you came." I handed him the letter. His gaze lingered on the envelope as if it weighed more than paper and ink. He opened it, read silently, his expression controlled except for a slight tremor at his mouth. When he finally looked up, his voice carried a note of quiet respect. "Your father, he was a proud man. I wish I had known of his illness sooner." I told him everything then, the false accusation at the clinic, the lawsuit that ruined me, the endless hospital visits, the sale of our home, the nights I spent at his bedside begging for a miracle. My words were steady, though each memory cut like glass. He listened without interruption, his fingers pressed together under his chin. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Then he leaned forward. "You trained as a nurse. I may have a place for you here. My father, Charles, suffered a stroke 6 months ago. He's made progress, but he still needs constant care. Our caregiver recently left, and I need someone I can trust." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Work. A room? Stability? The tears that had been burning behind my eyes threatened to spill, but I forced myself to hold steady. "Are you offering me the job?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "Work here, live here, be compensated fairly. My father is difficult, but I believe you can handle him." I drew in a long breath, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but real. For the first time since I buried my father, I could imagine that maybe I wasn't at the end of my story. Maybe I had just stepped into its next chapter. I followed the house attendant up the wide staircase, my steps muffled by the thick carpet. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and lavender, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the walls. He paused outside a set of double doors and knocked gently. From within came a gruff voice, low but firm. "Come in." The study was large, airy, with tall windows that overlooked a garden. By the window sat an elderly man in a high-backed chair, a cane resting against the table beside him. His posture was stiff, his silver hair neatly combed back. But what struck me most were his eyes, sharp, calculating, as if measuring me before I'd even spoken a word. This was Charles Thompson. "So," he said, his voice touched with irony, "you're the one they've sent to keep me alive. Another jailer." I forced a smile and stepped forward. "My name is Anna Whitaker. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Thompson." He studied me openly, his gaze traveling from my face down to my shoes. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a short laugh. "At least you're not dull to look at." The last one looked like she'd been pickled too long. From behind me, Richard's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Father enough. Anna is here because she's capable, not for your amusement." Charles only lifted a brow, unconcerned. "We'll see. I've run companies, Anna. I can tell when someone is weak. If you last more than a week, maybe I'll start to believe you're worth the trouble." His words should have stung, but instead I felt a strange steadiness take hold. "I don't intend to be weak," I said simply. For the first time, something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good. We'll get along, then." That evening, I was invited to join them for dinner. The dining room was vast, with a table that could have seated 20, though only 4 places had been set. Richard sat at the head, Charles at his right, and beside him a woman I hadn't yet met. She was tall, with elegant silver hair coiled at her neck, her posture perfectly straight. A string of pearls glimmered at her throat. "This is my aunt, Margaret Thompson," Richard introduced. Margaret's voice carried the lilting resonance of someone who had once commanded an audience. "So, you are Anna. Richard tells me you've had a difficult time. Well, this house can be unforgiving, but I hope you'll find it a place of refuge." Her gaze was steady but not unkind. There was dignity in her every movement, the aura of a woman accustomed to fine theaters and concert halls. I realized with a start that she must be the same Margaret Thompson whose name I had seen once on a faded opera poster in a thrift shop. The meal was formal but not cold. Conversation flowed in measured tones, with Charles occasionally grumbling but never directing his sharpness at me again. Margaret asked about my nursing background, and I answered cautiously, leaving out the humiliation of the clinic. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. Afterward, the housekeeper, a kindly woman named Mrs. Howard, led me to a guest room in the West Wing. When she opened the door, my throat tightened. The room was spacious, with a soft bed dressed in crisp linen, a window overlooking the garden, and even a small adjoining bath. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary. To me, after 3 nights on a station bench, it was salvation. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the exhaustion of the past weeks pressed down on me. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe I might have a place again. Not just as a guest, but as a person who belonged. I was exploring the house one quiet afternoon, tracing my fingers along the shelves of Charles's study, when my eyes landed on a silver frame placed deliberately on his desk. It was a portrait of a young woman, her features delicate yet striking, her gaze carrying that mix of innocence and quiet defiance only the truly alive can hold. Beneath the frame was a nameplate polished to perfection, Catherine Thompson. My breath caught. The name echoed through me, colliding with memories I had long buried. Catherine, Katie, Richard's daughter, the girl whose tragic death in a car accident was spoken of in hushed tones, always with a veil of grief. Everyone said she had been taken too young, and Charles, her godfather, had never quite recovered from the loss. But it wasn't just the name that rattled me. It was the face. I leaned closer, my pulse hammering. I knew those eyes. I knew the curve of that jawline, the subtle tilt of her lips. They belonged not only to Catherine Thompson, but to a patient I had once tended to in the dim corridors of the state psychiatric hospital. Her name had been Yevdokia, though she barely answered when spoken to. Her hair was disheveled, her voice fractured, her eyes haunted. Yet beneath the layers of neglect and madness, I had recognized beauty, a spark of something broken but not extinguished. The resemblance was undeniable. I remember pausing back then, thinking she looked out of place in that sterile, gray institution, like a bird with clipped wings shoved into a rusting cage. And now, staring at Catherine's portrait in Charles's home, my memory refused to dismiss the possibility. They were the same. They had to be. A cold chill swept through me, though the study was warm, the fire in the hearth still crackling from the morning. Could it be that Catherine hadn't died at all? That the accident was a lie? A story woven tightly enough to conceal a truth too dangerous to speak? But if she lived, why was she locked away in that asylum under another name? Who had placed her there, and what were they protecting or hiding? I sank into Charles's armchair, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't idle curiosity, it was a thread of fate tugging at my hands, daring me to unravel it. I thought of the nights I had spent at the hospital, the cries of patients echoing through the halls, Yevdokia's hollow eyes meeting mine through the bars of her world. What if she had tried to tell me something then, in her fractured murmurs? What if I had missed the chance to save her? The photograph stared back at me, as if accusing me of complicity. I knew in that moment I could not let it go. Richard's daughter might still be alive, hidden in plain sight, silenced by those who should have protected her. The thought was unbearable, and yet it filled me with a grim determination. I closed the study door softly behind me, my heart pounding with a secret I dared not yet share. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this mansion, Catherine's shadow lingered, and I was going to follow it no matter where it led. I couldn't sleep that night. The photo of Catherine Thompson haunted me. The same soft jawline, the same eyes that once looked at me blankly from the window of the psychiatric ward. My pulse refused to steady. If Katie had really died in that car crash years ago, then who had I spoken to at the hospital? Who was Yevdokia? At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen casting pale shadows across the room. I searched everything I could about the accident. Headlines popped up. Tragic fire claims young woman's life. Richard Thompson's daughter dies in car blaze. I clicked through article after article, but the details gnawed at me. The body had been burned beyond recognition, the report said. They relied on dental records to confirm the identity. No witnesses, no photos, just fragments of charred metal and smoke. Something about it felt too convenient. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and memory snapped like a whip. Yevdokia's trembling hands, the thin scar on her left wrist running from palm to forearm. At the time, I assumed it was from self-harm or an accident. But as I scrolled through old pictures of Catherine online, one image made my breath hitch. A candid photo from her college years. Her sleeve had slipped up, revealing the faint outline of a scar in the exact same place. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a coincidence. Driven by a cold urgency, I called the psychiatric hospital where I once worked. The receptionist recognized my name. I'd been on staff during Yevdokia's stay. I asked carefully at first about the patient records. Most files, she told me, were confidential. But when I pressed, saying it was for medical research, she hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She's no longer here," the woman said. "She was discharged a few months after you left." Discharged? By whom? My knuckles whitened around the phone. "A guardian," she whispered. "A man. Signed all the papers. Very well connected. His name was Alex Griffin." The air left my lungs in a sharp, unsteady exhale. Alex Griffin, the polished partner of Richard Thompson, the man who smiled like a politician and moved money like a magician. Of course it was him. He wasn't just Richard's associate, he was his shield, his fixer. I hung up and sat in silence, staring at the wall. 1,000 fragments locked together in my mind. Katie hadn't burned to death in that car. She had been hidden, renamed, buried alive in another kind of prison. And Alex Griffin had made it happen. The weight of it pressed into my chest. For years, people had pitted Richard's loss, admiring his strength in the face of tragedy. Meanwhile, the truth was rotting under their feet. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "She's alive, she has to be alive." The suspicion I carried had transformed into conviction. The shadows of the Thompson family stretched further than I imagined, and now I was entangled in them. One thing was certain, I couldn't walk away anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this family's history was far from what they let on. Every polite smile at dinner, every carefully measured word, it all seemed rehearsed, like a play that had been staged too many times. And the more I listened, the more I noticed the cracks. Charles avoided any mention of Catherine, Richard's late daughter, like the topic itself was cursed. But I had seen her face, those photographs in his study. And I had seen that same face before in a psychiatric hospital, staring at me with haunted eyes under a different name, Yevdokia. That alone was enough to keep me awake at night. But there were other threads, and I began tugging at them one by one. Richard's business partners, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers, were names I kept hearing in passing. Their relationship with the family seemed cordial now, but the records told another story. I spent hours combing through public filings, old news clippings, and even forgotten corners of the company's archives. What emerged was a picture of greed and resentment. Griffin and Myers had once been Catherine's strongest allies, yet disputes over money, stock options, and missing funds had turned their alliance bitter. Still, bitterness alone didn't explain why a young woman had vanished. It wasn't until I ventured into Catherine's old room that the pieces began to shift into place. The room had been left almost untouched, a shrine of sorts, her favorite books neatly stacked, perfume bottles gathering dust, a faded scarf draped across the chair as if she had left in a hurry and would return any moment. I don't know what pulled me to check the desk, but when I slid open the drawer, my hand brushed against a worn leather notebook. Its pages were fragile, edges frayed, the ink smudged in places as if she had written in haste or with fear pressing down on her. I sat on the floor and began to read. Her handwriting was sharp, almost impatient, but her words struck like a blade. I know what they're doing. The contracts are forged. They think Father won't notice. But he trusts me more than anyone. I'll tell him soon. He deserves to know. I flipped to another page, my pulse racing. I confronted Alex today. He brushed me off, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Anthony pretends nothing's wrong, but I heard them whispering in the study. They'll ruin everything if I don't stop them. The entries grew more frantic as I turned the pages, the writing messier more hurried. And then, abruptly, they stopped. No conclusion, no explanation, just silence after her last words. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. I sat frozen, the diary heavy in my hands. This wasn't speculation anymore, wasn't some shadowy suspicion. Catherine hadn't been blind, naive, or careless. She had known the truth, known about the fraud, the betrayal, the rot beneath her father's empire. She had tried to act, and then, right when she was about to expose everything, she disappeared. The air in that room seemed to grow colder. The silence pressed down like a weight. For the first time, I felt it clearly. This family wasn't haunted by grief. They were haunted by guilt. And I couldn't help but wonder, if Catherine had been silenced, how far would they go to silence me? That evening, the mansion no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. The echo of footsteps across the marble hall made me tense. 2 unfamiliar cars pulled up outside, their engines cutting through the quiet like a warning bell. I peeked from behind the heavy curtains and saw them, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers. Their presence here was no accident. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. I had seen them before, in the sterile corridors of the psychiatric clinic, their sharp voices carrying threats cloaked as negotiations. The memory of that encounter still haunted me. And now, here they were, stepping confidently into the Whitmore estate as though they owned it. I slipped deeper into the shadowed corner of the hall. praying they wouldn't catch a glimpse of me. If they recognized me, if they remembered my face from that day, I knew the questions would come. And questions from men like them were not meant to be answered. From a distance, I watched as Richard greeted them in the grand drawing room. His tone was steady, almost cordial, but I caught the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously against his glass. They weren't friends. They were sharks circling, waiting for weakness. I pressed my back against the wall, straining to hear. Their voices carried low and deliberate, every word dripping with implication. They spoke of deals left unfinished, numbers that didn't add up, and Catherine, always Catherine. Her name hung in the air like a ghost neither of them wanted to acknowledge, yet couldn't escape. Then Richard's voice, quieter, weighed down with something heavier than business. She told me once, before she disappeared, said she had stumbled on some unusual documents, contracts that didn't make sense. She wanted me to see them. The words slammed into me like a blow. My pulse quickened. That matched exactly what I had read in Catherine's journal just hours earlier. The frantic scrawls, her fear of being watched, the confession that she had discovered financial fraud buried deep in her father's company's partnerships. And now here was Richard, unknowingly confirming every word. I gripped the edge of the stairwell, my knuckles white. The pieces were aligning in a way that chilled me. Catherine had been on the brink of exposing them. She had intended to confront her father, to bring the truth to light. But before she could, she vanished. Griffin leaned forward, his voice sharp but controlled. Richard, the past is best left buried. She was impulsive. Don't let old stories cloud the future we're building here. Myers said nothing, but the way his eyes narrowed told me enough. There was knowledge there, knowledge and guilt hidden behind a polished mask. I remained silent in the dark, heart hammering. I couldn't let them know I was listening. I couldn't let them know I understood. But the truth was clear. Whatever happened to Catherine was no accident. These men, these partners, were tied to her disappearance. And now, whether they realized it or not, I was tied to it too. The mansion's silence felt suffocating once they left, the air heavy with secrets. But I knew one thing with certainty. Catherine hadn't been paranoid. She had been right, and the danger she feared was closer than ever. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The names Griffin and Myers weren't just whispers in Katie's journal anymore. They had walked through the doors of the Whitaker estate themselves. If they were bold enough to show up here, then I had no doubt their claws were sunk deep into whatever darkness Katie had stumbled across. And if I was going to fight them, I needed an ally. That's when Marina came to mind. She and I had worked together years ago, back at the city hospital. Marina wasn't just a nurse with quick hands. She was sharp, resourceful, and had a memory like a steel trap. If anyone could help me find the missing pieces, it was her. I dialed her number with trembling fingers, praying she'd even remember me after all this time. Anna. Her voice was surprised but warm. It's been forever. How are you? I didn't waste time with small talk. Marina, I need your help, and it has to stay between us. I took a deep breath before continuing. Do you remember a patient named Yevdokia? Admitted maybe 6 months ago? There should be a file. I need access to it. There was a pause on the other end. I could picture her, brows furrowed, turning the name over in her head. Finally, she said, I do remember her. Quiet woman, terminal case, right? Why do you need her records? Because I think they're connected to Katie's death. I whispered, my throat tight. I can't explain everything over the phone. Just can you look? Can you find it for me? Marina didn't answer right away, and I thought I'd asked too much. Then she said firmly, I'll see what I can do. But Anna, if I get caught, I could lose my license. You know that. I know, I said softly. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. A long exhale came through the line, and then, all right, I'll dig into the archives. I'll call you when I have something. But Anna, be careful. If this ties back to Griffin and Myers, you're playing with fire. Her words lingered long after I hung up. She was right. I was already in too deep, but pulling out wasn't an option anymore. That night, as the wind howled around the estate and the walls seemed to creak with secrets, I began sketching out a plan. It wasn't enough just to know that Griffin and Myers were involved. I had to expose them. If Katie had died trying to reveal the truth, then someone had to finish what she started. Step 1. Wait for Marina's call. If Yevdokia's medical records showed irregularities, falsified signatures, or unexplained treatments, it would be my first thread of evidence. Step 2. Track down Katie's trail. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath the lies, was proof that she hadn't simply vanished into the grave they claimed she was in. Step 3. Prepare myself for the storm. Because going after Griffin and Myers wasn't just about paperwork or whispers in journals. These men didn't operate in half measures. They were dangerous, and now I was standing in their shadow. I closed Katie's journal and pressed my palm against the worn leather cover. Her words had led me this far. Now it was my turn to act. The pieces were moving, and I had just chosen my side. And though my chest was tight with fear, a spark of resolve burned brighter than ever. Whatever lay ahead, I wasn't going back down. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around me were shrinking. Griffin and Myers were showing up at the house more often, strutting through the halls as if they owned them. They never said much to me directly, but the way their eyes lingered, cold, watchful, sent a chill down my spine every time. Their presence wasn't casual. It was deliberate, a silent reminder that I was stepping into territory where I didn't belong. One evening, Charles closed the study door behind him and leaned heavily against the desk. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's something you need to know about Katie," he said, his gaze fixed on the fire. My heart skipped. She argued with Griffin the week before the crash. It wasn't a small fight. She accused him of pushing her into a deal she didn't want. She threatened to walk away from the contract entirely. I felt my breath catch, and then the accident happened. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. Griffin claimed it was a misunderstanding, but Katie wouldn't have driven on that road, not in the middle of the night. She hated that stretch. Too narrow, too many blind curves. She avoided it unless she had no choice. The implication hit me like a blow. I had been dancing around the idea, but hearing Charles say it out loud made it real. Katie's accident might not have been an accident at all. After that conversation, I started noticing things I had brushed off before. A car idling at the end of the driveway longer than it should. Footsteps echoing on the porch when no one came to the door. The faint sense that eyes were on me even when I was alone in the kitchen, the blinds half drawn. At night, I lay awake listening to every creak of the old house, every shift of wind against the shutters. My rational mind told me I was being paranoid, but instinct whispered otherwise. Paranoia didn't explain the shadow I caught in the reflection of the living room window. It didn't explain the way Griffin's smile lingered too long, sharp at the edges when our eyes met. Marina had promised to get me the files. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. But hope came with risk. If Griffin and Myers discovered what I was doing, I wouldn't just be putting myself in danger. I'd be dragging Charles into it too. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned, but no one was there. My pulse hammered in my ears. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't just imagining it. Someone was watching. And for the first time since this all began, the fear was no longer distant. It was here, in the air I breathed, tightening around me like a noose. The more I read, the more I realized Catherine had left breadcrumbs, small, careful notes that now painted a much darker picture. The diary pages were fragile under my fingertips, the ink faint but still sharp enough to pierce through decades of silence. She had written about meetings with Griffin and Myers, about contracts that were supposed to benefit the family but instead bled the estate dry. The entries mirrored everything Charles had confessed to me, down to the very day Catherine had argued with Griffin before the accident. The alignment between their stories was too precise to be coincidence. One passage made my stomach twist. If I push harder, they will make me disappear. I know what they are capable of. I stared at the line until the words blurred. She had known. Catherine hadn't been naive. She had been cornered, isolated, and silenced. I closed the diary and pressed it against my chest, fighting the shiver crawling up my spine. My instincts screamed, louder than ever. I wasn't just digging into the past anymore. I was stepping onto the same path Catherine had walked, and I could feel the walls closing in. Every glance over my shoulder, every flicker of a car parked too long on the street, every creak outside my window felt like a warning. And yet I couldn't stop. I started organizing the evidence, pages copied, photographs cataloged, Charles's testimony written down. Each detail built a scaffolding of truth, but I knew scaffolding could collapse if I wasn't careful. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became. Griffin and Myers had orchestrated not just financial ruin, but lives broken to keep their grip intact. Catherine had stood against them, and it had cost her everything. I whispered to myself, I won't let it end the same way. Still, the sense of time running out pressed on me. Nights felt shorter. My heartbeat never slowed. Even the simplest tasks, checking the mail, walking down the driveway, became exercises in paranoia. I caught shadows moving where no one should be. Once, I swore I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn and find empty air. But I trusted my intuition, and it told me the storm was almost here. I locked the diary away, but the words clung to me like smoke. The truth was no longer just about Catherine or the Thompson estate. It was about survival. I had uncovered enough to shake the foundation of Griffin and Myers, and they would know it. Sitting at the desk late one night, I wrote one final line in my notebook. There's no turning back. I didn't know what the next day would bring, only that the collision was inevitable. The evidence, the danger, the legacy, it was all converging. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the same forces that had silenced Catherine were waiting for me. And yet, instead of fear, a strange calm settled in. The pieces were aligning, and destiny was moving forward. I felt it in my bones. The truth was about to erupt, and when it did, the fate of the Thompson family and my own life would be forever altered.